Hi, I'm RebeccaMuriuki. I am a short-term rental real estate mentor for high-achieving Black women. I am about to go onto the Online Prosperity Show, and this is a power-packed episode where I talk about my journey, how I left my high-paying corporate career to pursue full-on financial freedom, and how I've created property-backed wealth through the short-term real estate model, and how you can do the same.
Welcome to yet another exciting episode of the Online Prosperity Show, your premier destination for exclusive insights into our guests' journeys and expertise. I'm your host, Prosper Taruvinga, and today we have a truly inspiring guest whose story is both empowering and transformative. Now, Rebecca, how are you doing today?
I am very well, excited for this conversation. How are you, Prosper?
Fantastic. Well, the pleasure is all mine. I've heard you're Formula One fan, so I was trying to look up who is winning currently because they were actually in Melbourne not so long ago. Did you have a favorite?
Yes. I am Team LH all the way, Lewis Hamilton. So him and his new team Ferrari are not doing very well right now, so we need to put all the prayers in for the next few races.
You know what? You know what fascinates me about Formula One, Rebecca? The speed of how they take out the tires, especially when they're doing that changeover.
Yeah.
I wish I can have a team like that can just sit, everything else is in place, and the car actually goes in play, or just maybe be in that pit and see how they all do it, because the precision is precise.
Yeah, it's crazy, like 2.5 seconds to change 4 heavy tires. I'm told that those guys have to go through a lot of training. They are in the gym almost every day because every second counts in Formula One, so it's incredible.
Absolutely. Well, it's that sort of precision that you also maybe bring to the work that you're doing. I mean, for those that are watching right now, they might be thinking, wait a minute, have we tuned into a Formula One fandom discussion or whatnot? Well, thank you for tuning into the Online Prosperity Show. Now, if you're watching this, I want you to imagine maybe juggling a high-powered corporate career and then ending up coaching ambitious women while raising twins, and also maintaining, the speed of watching a Formula One race on TV without missing a single beat. I know that sounds like a superhero, but that's what our guest might have just been doing before we got her on the show. So Rebecca is a seasoned actuary who has had multifaceted background, and we're going to be diving into her past experiences, her current initiatives, and also the clients that she serves, because at the moment, she has a mastermind that helps bold Black women who are ready to create a profitable passive income from their first 1 to 3 properties, especially under 12 months. Now, we could, that's like a speedy turnaround. And I think there's a whole Formula One race that actually happens. You might have a precision, methodology and framework that people follow. But are gyms involved? Because if gyms are involved, a lot of people might actually turn you down and say, I don't want to be lifting heavy things. Now, Rebecca, tell us a little bit about your journey and, sort of how you got started and what it is you're working on currently.
Yeah, so thank you so much for articulating my journey also well. So I am an ex-corporate director. I used to practice at Deloitte for 12 years. I left my high-paying corporate job just over a year ago to pursue full-on financial freedom. So as you mentioned, Prosper, I am a mom of 3, including twins. And I knew 5 years ago that the path that I was on was not the path that was going to create the life I wanted. So 5 years ago, when we were all, holed up in our homes with lockdown, I had my twins. And so naturally, I had a lot of time to reflect, to pause, to think, because during that time, there were no visitors, we couldn't go out. And it was actually quite daunting to go from being a mom of one to a mom of three and having to figure this thing out on my own. So during that time, I also had a lot of time to just think about the life that I wanted versus the life that I had at that time. And I am a very good observer. So I would observe the people who had, risen up the ranks in their corporate careers, particularly in the kind of space that I was in, the industry that I was in. And I knew that I didn't want their lives because their lives entailed working 12 to 16 hours. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? There are some people who actually love doing that, who find a lot of excitement from that. And ordinarily, because there's a lot of travel involved in the kind of role that I was in, that meant I could be called for a board meeting at 8 a.m., meaning I missed the school drop off. I could be called to travel unplanned for 3 days, which means I don't see my kids for that time. And so I knew that I didn't want to be on that path for long. So people get surprised when they hear that I quit this high paying corporate job, but this has been a 5 year plan in the making. It didn't just happen 12 months ago when I tendered my resignation letter. It happened first from me questioning whether there was an alternative to what we are naturally, I would say, programmed from a very young age, and understandably so. Especially when you think of the African context and setting, you're programmed to study hard, do well at school, get a good job, stay out of trouble, and then retire at 65. And my path and trajectory really changed when I started challenging those beliefs that were instilled in me and were programmed in me from a young age. And that's when I really started to pour into myself. I started, looking for people because there were no people who were modeling the kind of life I wanted. It was either you rise up the ranks, do well in your career, sacrifice everything else, even if it's an important value to you, like family. For me, family is huge. Travel is an important value for me. And I was like, I need to find other people who are modeling the kind of life I wanted. And that's how I started getting into personal development. And that year was the first year where I actually paid from my pocket for a mindset. It was actually a mindset and business coaching program because at the time I thought, okay, my ticket to financial freedom, to not having to depend on a job and to actually creating the option for me to step away without downgrading my lifestyle is through business. So that was the first investment I made. Very scary for a corporate woman because we're just used to our employers taking us on trainings, courses. Most of the times we don't even know how much they spend, and they spend a lot of money. So it was very new for me. And I learned so much about the mind and how we can literally design our lives by changing how we think, how we tap into our feelings, the laws of the universe, and all these things that I had never heard of before. It was just incredible. And through that path, I started to interact with so many other people online, in person, who were thinking very differently to, the typical circles of friends and colleagues that I found myself in. And that is how I, stumbled across property investing, but done very differently. But I want to pause there because the story is so long. And I want to, if there's anything you want to unpack before I continue on, how I then landed up in resigning from my job and actually being able to sustain my lifestyle and replace my corporate paycheck through property investing.
Absolutely. I was actually gonna conclude the episode right there because you he went into such depth, and thank you so much for sharing that with us there, Rebecca. Now, obviously, there is a lot to unpack there, and I just really wanted to bring us back to you introduced us to a younger Rebecca who would have been growing up, around maybe, some sort of societal expectation, like you said, to do well, go to school, and things of that nature. But you also juxtaposed that with you had no people that you could look up to. So obviously, for me, representation matters. Now, as a kid, did you at least see people around you that would have at least shown you or paved the way for you to then maybe end up in such a high flying corporate role with Deloitte?
Yeah, so the question is, did I see people, modeling where I landed up in my corporate career? Actually not. My mom, she passed away. May God rest her soul in peace. She was a doctor, and she passed away when I was around 8 years old. But she was highly ambitious. She came from poverty, and when I say poverty, I mean they were really, really poor. She wore her first shoe when she went to university. She used to tell stories to my dad. Of course, I was young, so I couldn't really understand of how they used soap to brush their teeth because they couldn't afford toothpaste. And so I think a lot of my tenacity and ambition does come from definitely from my mom, that DNA that obviously is in me from her. And my dad was a lecturer. He was a teacher. He became lecturer when I was probably around 5 years old. And, they were just living an average life as a middle class family. And I always wanted to do better. I always had this competitive streak in me. I guess that's why I love Formula One. And so I always wanted to see, okay, how far can I go? What's the best I can do? And that's really how I chose my actuarial career. Not a very good way to choose careers, but I was like, what's the most difficult thing I can do? So I can, and I always had this thing, and this is something that I've had to work on a lot of, I want to prove to the world that I can do it, that I can be the best, that I can get to the top. And, that drove me a lot in me studying. And it served me. It served me for the season that I was in my life. And it drove me to really outperform any expectations that my family had. And, I was the star of the family. I came out from high school with all A's. I went into university, had a full scholarship. University was, I guess, the first, real challenge for me when it came to education because, I wasn't the star anymore. And you realize, okay, wow, there are a lot of smart people out there in the world. But I finished my degree in record time. I qualified as an actuary, did all the difficult exams. I really did tick the box in doing the things that a lot of people said were not possible. Even my teachers in high school, I still remember some of them saying, why don't you just do accounting? Why don't you just do something different? And every time someone tells me to do something easier, I'm always like, I'm not just going to do it. I'm going to show you how to do it, how it's done. And so that's really what pushed me and pushed me and pushed me. And when I got into the corporate world, I feel that was a real wake-up call. Because one, you talk about representation. There were no Black women in leadership. I was the only Black woman in the first team that I worked in South Africa, in Johannesburg. And that was hard. That was hard because representation is so important in seeing a path for yourself, because when you see someone else modeling what you want and who looks like you realize, okay, it's possible for me. So that's when a lot of self-doubt, got planted into my mind and, really just second guessing yourself, wondering, okay, is there even a reason for me to work hard and put all this effort when there is no one else who looks like me here? And even naturally, because of that, even the opportunities that were made available to us and my colleagues at my level were very different, right? Naturally, you will want to interact with people who think, look, talk like you. And I don't think there's anything inherently incorrect with that, but it's a bias that I'm so glad people are talking about right now. I think it has been demonized as meaning you're racist, but I don't think that's the case. I'm just glad that people are now really aware of that bias and are are intentionally working on widening the representation, on making sure people get equal opportunities, not just because, you know, you guys watch rugby and you have something in common to talk about on a Monday. And so I feel that while it had a negative impact on my confidence, I think it was also a double-edged sword because again, I found myself in this place where I found myself in this place where there was a lot of resistance in you know, from me putting going up and going forward and rising up the ranks in the corporate career. But again, it was another challenge for me. It was like, okay, I am going to get to the top of this corporate ladder. I'm going to smash this ceiling and I'm going to show other women how it's done. And that's really how I actually got into coaching in the first place, because that was the first sort of business that I started when I started to explore what other things I could do. So I started teaching women how to actually smash these ceilings. What are the things that we were programmed to do as black women that actually don't serve us when we want to rise up the ranks? And you know, I'm so grateful that I trusted in myself, even with all that, you know, all the challenges and all the, I'm looking for the word, but all the resistance that was there and not having that representation. I'm so glad that I continued, and yeah, it took me longer than other people. Other people took, you know, 7, 8 years to get to director level. It took me 10 years. But I'm grateful that I went on that path and I didn't give up. And I'm grateful for the corporate successes that I have because they have contributed to where I am now, like without a doubt. And even the women that I have helped see what's possible for them in their corporate careers. But at the same time, now I know what the top of the corporate ladder looks like. And that's also one of the reasons why I decided, you know what, this is not what I want my life to look like. It has worked for me, it has served me, but I want different.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for yet again another, glimpse into your world right there. I like how you say you climbed up the ladder and you saw what the top looked like. And there's also a word that you used. You were now observing what the people that were ahead of you were doing, and you didn't like what that looked like. Yes, it came with all the trappings of being, in the corporate space and, being in that glass office, but also it came with a sacrifice on, maybe time with your kids and everything else that sort of comes along the way. Now, would you think that maybe had you taken it slower, especially climbing the ladder, you would have still been thinking, whoa, maybe there's something that I haven't seen there? Because if you're playing a video game and you level up the game, there's no point in you going to level 1 again and wanting to start. You want to go and do something else because you've really completed all the obstacles.
Oh, yeah. No one has ever asked me this question. That's such a good question. Yeah, definitely. I think if I had been a bit more lenient on myself and maybe even chosen a different industry, because I have been in consulting for most of my career. Maybe if I just went the traditional path, you know, a typical corporation where it's really 8 to 5, good boundaries. You don't work on weekends. You don't get called by corporate clients in the middle of the night. Maybe I would still be there because it would still be comfortable. But again, the personality, the kind of person that I am is I like hard. I will always choose hard because I just love giving myself those challenges. And doing things in the face of a lot of adversity. Yes, that's the word I was looking for. Doing things in the face of adversity that a lot of people ordinarily wouldn't or would give up too soon. So I think that definitely played a role because if I was in a typical company, it would probably take longer, maybe 15 to 20 years. And even then, there's no guarantee because there are only, for example, maybe 7 spaces in top executive management. Whereas in the kind of corporations and firms that I was in, there really isn't a limit. If you do well, if you deliver, if you grow your portfolio, you will rise up the ranks. So it's a very different business model. But yeah, I love that question. And I'm glad I chose hard because it helped me accelerate that part of my life in a way. Because again, your kids are only young for a very short amount of time. And then that window to be that present mom goes away. And I would hear these women after they retire. They don't talk about it when they're still in those corner offices. They talk about it when they're retired. I would hear them say, "Oh, I missed so many swimming galas for my kids. I wish I was there for them when they were going for school assembly. I wish I had done more school drop-offs and pickups. And I didn't want to be the mom who wished and regretted. I wanted to be the mom who was fully present, but still not having to give up my ambitions. And that's why I tried so many different things to find a way that I could be there for my kids, but still make the kind of money that I wanted to. And unfortunately for me, my corporate job didn't allow me to do both.
Absolutely. Speaking of both, you had a way of doing things twice as fast and twice as quick, and hence the twins now. I mean, while everybody was coughing into their elbows, you were busy embracing new bundles of joy, not one, but two. And that explains you wanting to do things hard. Could that have been part of the calling as well?
I think so. I think so. And I'm a believer, so I believe that God won't give you something that's harder for you, that's harder than you can actually carry. And so in the literal sense, I guess for me carrying two girls I would say it was probably in the top three, one of the hardest challenges, those first 6 months where I was all by me and my spouse and my son and my house helps and me just having to figure things out. Yeah.
I can imagine. So, I mean, obviously, for some people, that would have been a turning point, but for you,
Hmm.
you looked at it as a way to look within, because obviously you'd already been doing the personal development, but now you doubled down, and actually went full on this. Some people would have been like, well, you know what, I think I've seen what it's like at the top here. Now let me just relax and see what's in store for me. But I think you went and started the hardest thing, which is self-reflection. Don't get me
Yeah.
wrong, with actuarial science and everything else, you could always write a paper. There's always somebody who's written a past exam that you can look at and assess. I don't know what you guys do for
Yeah.
life and enjoyment, but personal development is within, and you're
Yeah.
facing just about everything you had been trying to run away from.
Yeah.
If you can maybe elaborate on that a little bit or comment on that a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Well, 200% does not exist. And let me not say things that other actuaries won't agree with, but I absolutely agree with you on that, Prosper. It's not, and I don't know if it's also maybe a cultural thing, but I feel from an African context, talking about yourself, doing that internal reflection, really digging into your shadows, your self sabotages, is not something that is naturally even encouraged to talk about. You know, when I started doing therapy, the amount of just
even
even,
even I'm laughing.
yeah, you see, there you go.
I'm
I
sorry.
mean, I totally get it. I totally get it. People would be like, is everything okay? And I'm like, I'm perfectly okay, but I want to go from good to great. I want to go from great to exceptional. And people would be like, no, you shouldn't even talk about this in public. People will think your marriage is under
Uh,
attack. And oh, people will think now you need to be checked at by a psychiatrist. And there's so there's so much negative perceptions out there, even that becomes now a barrier to people actually doing the self-development work in itself.
right. Nah, because obviously, you see, I don't think we're from a very different culture because the more educated you become, people actually start thinking there's a screw loose, and they usually just start associating education with, I don't think you're normal anymore. So the fact that you now really are seeing a professional who is helping you with matters of the mind, I was feeling your pains. Sorry if I laugh, but I really was, because there you are, you've achieved the top of your game, you've achieved every possible accolade they possibly can be afforded to a person like yourself, and then you say you're going to therapy. So I just felt your pain there for a little bit, and obviously, yes. And throughout, you discovered yourself, you started finding out things that would definitely help you. In my culture, you're supposed to embrace your shadows, because they're the ones that keep you safe. You go under the shadow of a tree, because that's just the nature of things. And so if you start running away from your shadows, then that means you want to cease existing, because that's just the nature of the game. What was the feedback that you started receiving, not from other people but from yourself, on the journey that you were getting onto? What sort of realizations were you now coming to terms with? Because it's one thing, obviously, to hear what other people are saying, that's their problem, but what were you saying about all of this?
Oh, so good. So I think, and I've already talked about it as we were speaking, but one of the things that I realized was I was looking a lot for external validation.
Mm.
And I had not done the work internally to fully believe that I was enough. Me, on my own, standalone, I was enough. I didn't need to prove to someone else that I could be a great mom. I didn't need to prove to someone else that I could earn a six-figure paycheck and that made me an awesome person. And I had to do a lot of breaking down those beliefs because, like I shared earlier, yes, being in an African family where you're constantly being told, you got to do well, you got to do well, you've got to do this and that and that. It does have an impact in how you start to see yourself and how you start to tie your identity with achievements. And I had to break that up. The second big realization was for me, and this is something I'm still working on, to be honest, is people pleasing. First
Mm.
of all, that did not serve me as much as I thought it did in my corporate career. And it's actually interesting because I went into this program to build my business. But what happened is I actually got, when I finished that program, within 4 months, I got my promotion to associate director. So it actually also accelerated my path in my corporate career because I started doing this work internally. And my confidence, I mean, I am honestly, if you saw me 5 years from now and you see me now, you'll be like, wow, this is a different version of Rebecca because my confidence just went up and up and up. And I started to really see myself for who I am and not for what I have achieved or what I have not achieved. And that also gave me the courage to step into this unknown, which a lot of people struggle with, especially if you've been in corporate, you've been acclimatized to getting this paycheck every month. that personal development work really helped me step into what if. You know, a lot of times we think of what if and then it's a negative statement. What if I don't make it? But I started affirming myself and asking myself questions. What if I do make it? What if this is actually the best decision that I have made? What if I actually end up making more than I could have made in my corporate career if I stayed on for the next 5 years? You know,
Mm.
and it really, honestly, it changed me from the inside out. But it also, being in those spaces, because the thing is, like you're saying, Prosper, when you're in circles of friends and colleagues who are not talking about personal development, mindset, the laws of the universe, you don't even know that another world exists. You
Oh,
don't even know that there is another way to living that is infinitely better to how you're living, thinking, acting, and feeling. And so being in those spaces really helped me to see a different reality. And I believe in alternate realities. Like there's always an alternative reality that you could be living if only you thought differently, and then the decisions you made would be very different. So I think that was also very powerful because it also helped me normalize people making money not necessarily from a corporate job, people making money from running businesses, people making money from being bold and taking the courage to go and invest in property, even if they didn't have the money and they had to take debt to do it. And just normalizing that. It happens subconsciously, but now that I'm talking with you, I realize that, wow, that was not how I thought 5 years ago.
absolutely, absolutely, and I'm happy you've introduced us to this version of Rebecca, because I can only imagine the version that we would have met before the personal development would have been happening. You probably wouldn't have had time for us because you always wanted to rush and do something, be somewhere, and get stuff done. So good on you for having done the work. Now, part of the things that you went on and started was real estate. And that's also something, especially in our world, we have never been brought up to be owners. We've always been brought up to be workers of the land and things of that nature. I don't know if you see it in that way, obviously, or you saw it, or you can see it with the people that you speak to. How did you stumble onto real estate?
Yeah, I feel like now I need you on my podcast because this is what I talk about all the time. We are programmed to be earners and not owners.
Yes,
We are programmed to work for owners instead of becoming owners ourselves.
absolutely.
And of course, you know, colonialism and all the things that our forefathers went through have definitely had an impact on that. But now, especially when you hear people talking about money differently, now there's no excuse. Now there's no excuse, right? And so it's upon us to take that self responsibility to educate ourselves differently on money, on wealth creation, and then put ourselves in spaces intentionally where people are talking about money and wealth differently. Because if you just continue doing what you've been doing, you can't expect a different result. You know what Einstein says, insanity is just doing the same thing over and expecting a different result. So I feel like that is probably one of the pivotal belief patterns that I have had to change a lot because like I told you, how I was programmed to think about life and success is get a good job, stay out of trouble, rise up the ranks, and then retire and die. And when I started asking myself, what if there's a different way, and started looking intentionally for people who were doing it differently, especially people who had left corporate and started to create a life that, you know, corporate professionals would only dream of, that's when I started to see, okay, yeah, the wealthy people are playing the game of money very differently to being a worker and just working to get a, you know, 6% pay raise and a good bonus at the end of the year.
Absolutely. I like that a lot. And I love how you and liken it to a game, because so many people feel like whatever part in that game is what they're meant to be for the rest of their lives. But you can change. You're not a tree. You know what I mean? A tree would never move from where it's at, where it is and what it's supposed to do in life. That is it. If it's an apple tree, it would never end up or start identifying as a lemon tree. That would never happen. So, we've got an opportunity to really come into who we were supposed to be. And so many people never get the opportunity. And half of the reason is it's part systemic, and second is the education side of things, and also the learning curve is not as easy, especially when you're getting into the property realm. So I think those that know, play on those that don't necessarily know. And one of the things that is a deterrent for people getting into property is the start.
Yeah.
So the start usually is the education, the capital to start, and people just don't know how to do that now. How do you address this concern for your clients?
Oh, yes. I love this because now we're talking strategy and how to actually make money and create wealth and not just, things in theory. And first of all, my core premise, I talked about property investing, but I actually should have given my core premise at the start is short-term rental real estate is the fastest way to build wealth. I believe that without a doubt. Without a doubt, 100%. And I say this because, first of all, real estate generally allows you, as someone who hasn't come from wealth, who doesn't have a trust fund, who maybe doesn't have $100,000 in your bank account, you can literally go to the bank today, get pre-financing, and buy a real estate property in the next 3 months. Anyone who earns a paycheck can do that, right? And so it opens up opportunities that are just generally not available to people like me and maybe people like you. I don't know your background, Prosper, but definitely people like me who, my parents didn't have a pot of money to give to me when I graduated and left university.
Same.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. So this is the African story. And that's why I'm very focused on helping Black women, particularly because of the historical injustices and, all the wealth systemic issues we've had to deal with. So, how to get started? First of all, like you said, you need to have the education to even understand that, oh, actually, I can do this without $100,000 in my bank account, right? So for me, I talk about the four things that hold true in order for you to get on this path to building wealth through short-term rental real estate in under 5 years. And first of all, you need to have access to financing. So you need to be earning something. And it's so important. Don't quit your corporate job and be like, I've quit. I'm going into business. I'm going into this and that. Create space and time for yourself to do this. Like I created 5 years for myself to come and talk to you about this. So do the same. So you have to be earning a paycheck because that's going to give you access to affordable financing in the form of mortgages. Then you need to find properties and locations with rental demand where there is economic activity such that there are people who are looking for places to stay on a short-term basis. Okay. So for example, I know we always think about travel because Airbnb really started on talking to people who were traveling and who didn't want to stay in a hotel and wanted an alternative. But that's not the only type of tenant you can attract for short-term rental real estate. You can look for properties near hospitals, for example, where there are traveling medics, right? Traveling doctors, traveling nurses who don't want to stay in a hotel, want to be near the hospital, and maybe want a space that kind of feels like home. You could look for properties for traveling students who are coming on a short-term basis, doing an exchange program, for example, or even lecturers. So you could look for properties near academic institutions, right? So that's why I talk about the properties need to be in locations where there's certain economic activity that gives rise to rental demand for short-term stays. And for me, my niche initially was really to look for places where I could attract remote workers who are coming into the city, going to attend a conference, or maybe coming into a different space, want to work for a few days and maybe do a bit of traveling. So I was very, very clear on the kind of tenant that I wanted. So that's the second thing that needs to hold true. Then the third thing that needs to hold true, ideally, you should be looking for undervalued properties. Why is this important? Because when you buy that property, if you buy an undervalued property, that means that you are going to own, essentially, you're going to own more than how much you owe the bank, right? So let's say you find a property, just to make this example easy to understand, you find a property for 100,000 that's selling for $100,000. But really the property value is $120,000. On day one, when that property is transferred to you, you have actually essentially made a profit of $20,000 because you could sell that same property the same month, right? For $120,000, you pay back the bank $100,000 and you left with $20,000. Okay. And I mean, that's also a game that other people play, buying and selling. But for me, cash flow is really the key thing. And so that's the fourth thing that needs to hold true if you want to make money from short-term rental properties. You need to understand how to manage your short-term rental property so that it cash flows enough for you to pay that mortgage and keep and have extra for if you want to, build up on a cash reserve, or maybe you want to go on holiday. But really for me, the person who comes to me is like, I actually want financial freedom. So we do not then use that money for instant gratification. We use the leftovers to now reinvest in a very disciplined manner, so that within 5 years, not only have you built this rental portfolio that is creating this cash flow, you've also reinvested any extra income you've made, and now you have this additional income stream as well. So just from making that decision to go into short-term rental properties, you're cash flowing, and typically that cash flow is higher than a traditional long-term rental property because you've added value to the property. The property is typically furnished, so you're able to charge a premium than if you just did what I call the lazy investor approach of just buying and then renting to someone on a long-term basis. Of course, it also requires more time, but again, how important is financial freedom to you, right? If you can put in an extra 1 to 2 hours a day to be fully financially free in 5 years, is it worth it? I mean, 100% it's worth it. As opposed to just continuing doing what you're doing, staying in that corporate job, maybe you don't even like it, and then hoping that things will change, right? Saving your way towards wealth, which again, doesn't really work, right? You're going to have to save for 30, 40 years, which is a reality people don't talk about enough in order for you to create any semblance of wealth. Whereas the wealthy people, like I've just shared the 4 principles, they are looking for opportunities, undervalued properties. They are using other people's money, so financing. They are then creating cash flow. So basically, your tenants are paying your mortgage. You're not paying the mortgage from your pocket. So creating cash flow to pay that mortgage and have extra to then reinvest. And that's really the model that I teach my clients. Very simple, and something that you can replicate every 2 to 3 years. Because the point is, obviously, one property is not going to create financial freedom. You do need to scale that up. But again, you do not need to have 100 doors, which is what most gurus out there teach. Like, you need to have 100 properties in order to scale and become rich. You don't, right? If you know how to reinvest that extra cash flow you're earning, very strategically, you can afford to take more risk, right? So with that extra cash, you can then decide, okay, I want to do different things. Like I want to do angel investing where you can earn, 40% returns, because now that's extra cash that you've created and you're not risking your inability to pay the mortgage. But still on those rental properties, because you've added value, your short-term rentals will typically give you an ROI that's 2 to 3 times more than a typical property. So yeah, that's the blueprint. That's the blueprint to financial freedom in under 5 years.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing that with us. And it's a good thing we hit record a long time ago, because otherwise that would have just been my own personal information. But I think what you're
Yeah.
doing really matters, because such information and such education is not, I think you have scaled to the highest ranks in school. They don't teach any of this stuff in school and things of that nature. Whereas if somebody just really focuses on these last 10 or so minutes where you were giving us your blueprint, they literally would have a plan, for their life and things of that nature. But obviously, I want to play the devil's advocate here, Rebecca, for just 2 seconds. And if you would indulge me, somebody would think, wait a minute, I don't have the head that you have. You are an actual scientist. You worked with insurance. You're a high heating corporate person. I'm just a measly nurse or just a janitor in the local school or a teacher. I don't think I'll have a head to even know where to start or even have the mats to make it all make sense for me, etc., etc. What would you say to somebody like that?
Oh, that's a lovely question. And that's the beauty about the world we live in. A year ago, 2 years ago, I had zero knowledge on property, let alone short-term rental real estate. I knew nothing about it, right? And within 12 months, I was able to upskill myself. So I actually invested in mentorship, right? You don't have to do this alone unless you want to, but then that's going to take a lot of time and you're going to make mistakes. You would rather just invest and then learn from someone else's mistakes, get the blueprint, literally implement with focus, and then with the support of someone else who has done it. And this is also a principle that I have seen other wealthy people apply in their lives, right? They don't just make decisions uninformed. They look to other people. And that's why even in the corporate space, if you are very attentive, leaders, great leaders, ask questions a lot. They ask questions a lot, they ask questions to even people who are below them, their subordinates, their colleagues, because asking questions gives you insight that creates wisdom. But if you don't have the right people to ask those questions from, then it becomes very difficult. So I would say to someone like that, invest in yourself, right? You are your biggest asset. You invest in yourself by looking for people who have done what it is you want to do, and then learn from them. Learn from their mistakes. Learn from their wisdom. Ask the questions.
Absolutely, because
Yeah.
obviously, leaders leave clues and success leaves clues, really.
Yeah.
Through asking those questions, you now get, to formulate your own strategy. And I've noticed that you've also created a pathway that people can maybe easily enter into this space at their own time and in their own space. You've created the Full On Freedom podcast. Could you just maybe let us know how this platform complements your mission to empowering women?
Yes. So the Full On Freedom podcast is where and again, this is the beauty of the world we live in. There's so much free information out there. The only challenge is people who pay attention. So when you put your money down, you approach that investment very differently to when you hear free information that's out there. But still, I think it's still a great way to share. So that's where I share for free my perspectives behind the scenes of me building this real estate empire. What is working in the short-term rental real estate? Mindset shifts you need to make in order to move from the employee mindset to the top 1% wealthy mindset. So I talk all about those topics, and I also bring in people who are creating that kind of success. Remember, we talked about how hard it was for me to look and find a plausible path for me to move up the corporate ranks because I couldn't see anyone who looked like me who was doing that. And so that's why for me it's been so important to bring in people onto my podcast who are doing this, creating insane results, right? Who never came from wealth, who never came from money, but just trusted in themselves, looked for mentors, and literally just were very focused and disciplined in creating the lives they now get to live. So, yeah, that's a very good start if you want to explore more on real estate investing, as well as my secret podcast, Passive Income on Repeat, where I then just really break down the 4 steps that I've shared with you in this podcast on going from paycheck dependent to now replacing your corporate income through short-term rental real estate.
Fantastic. And I'm hoping we can be able to get access to those links, and then we can
Yes.
put them in the show notes there so that people can follow through and actually start learning at their own pace. I mean, obviously, even if you're, at work, or you're doing a run or walking your dog or whatever it is that you're doing, you can always be listening to a podcast here and there. Now, Rebecca, I can't thank you enough for the time that we've spent on the call today, but I kind of feel like you making it harder and harder for people to fail or any excuses, because if somebody says they're too busy, they're in their corporate job or whatever it is, you've been there, you've been to the highest ranks of it all, and you know what it's
Yeah.
like. So you can always
And
tell
I
them.
did this while working my corporate job. Like I
Absolutely.
did this, I built this while I was in my corporate job.
Absolutely. And then somebody might say, "Oh, but you haven't seen my kids, and there's so much to do." You say, "You know what? I've got twins." And and somebody might say, "Oh, wait a minute, I'm in Africa. Have you seen the inflation in the Zimbabwean dollar?" You say, "Wait a minute, I'm in Africa myself." So how can people
Yeah.
how can people maybe you've always already given us ways to connect with you and things like that, but I really feel like you are the epitome of representation, and for those that are watching this right now would definitely pick a thing or two that they can resonate with and get in touch with you. But I kind of feel like even though you leveled up with corporate, you obviously figured out your path, and now you you are working on this. This kind of felt like you're just only getting started. What's next?
Yeah, that is, wow, you ask such great questions. What's next is really for me, my big ambition and mission with my coaching, the coaching arm of my business is getting this knowledge and information and transformation to 100,000 women. That's a big mission.
Yeah.
And I don't know all the how, but I know that I'm going to do it, right? Because for me, the stats that, only 3 in 10 women in Africa are financially literate. That's crazy because that means even employees, people in corporate jobs, and don't have that financial literacy education. So that's for me, that's, I would say that's next on the horizon. And also scaling my property portfolio. So I went from 0 to 3 short-term rental properties in under 12 months. My goal is to get to 5 properties in the next year or two, and then just build my passive income to levels that people would never ever imagine were possible if you didn't come from wealth. So for me, that's those are the 2 big things that are on my radar.
Absolutely. Well, I can't thank you enough for not only what you're doing, but what you're doing for the girl child. Because I keep talking about representation, and representation matters.
Yeah.
And I've got 2 girls in my household right now who I think if they would watch this, they will be inspired. So thank you so much for all you're doing, Rebecca.
Thank you. Wow, that hit home. Thank you so much, Prosper.
Absolutely. Now, for those that are watching right now, help me thank Rebecca once again. I mean, her journey and insights are truly inspiring. I mean, if you found today's conversation worthwhile and obviously resonating, consider how Rebecca's strategies might actually be applied to your own path towards financial empowerment. And yeah, check out her podcast so that you can actually, get started passively, educating yourself. And if this is not for you, or you know of a woman that could use this sort of information, I encourage you to share this episode with someone that's going through maybe an identity crisis of sorts, where they have achieved maybe all they want, but they don't know what the next logical step would be. And I think this could be the next, thing that they can actually get started. And yeah, I can't thank Rebecca enough for taking the time and also going on the journey that you went on, because now people have a point of reference, and it's because of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Now, for those that are watching, stay tuned for our next episode where we're going to be exploring ideas to enhance your happiness and overall well being. Until next time, I want you to take proactive steps towards your prosperity to make your financial goals a reality. Bye for now.